What's up, folks? I'm Jake Ellenbogen. Today, we're going to be talking about the free agency pool. I'm going to give you my top 10 offensive free agents for the LA Rams, including some honorable mentions. But before I dive into that, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Follow me on all social media at JK Bogan, including Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Kick. And in addition to that, just want to let you guys know that today's sponsor is Prize Picks. You can use my code JK Bogan. It'll get you $50 instantly when you play at least a $5 lineup. If you haven't already, sign up using that code. And just for a short while, we have Jaden Daniels, a gimme at 0.5 passing yards. So be sure to dive in to the action there. Get it while you can. It's gone, of course, as soon as the game starts. So this is a huge one. Be sure to get in on the action with Prize Picks. All right, folks. So I've been asked, Jake, what's going on? What do we do this offseason? 2021, you said as soon as they got Matthew Stafford, they were winning the Super Bowl. But what's going on this season? Because I think, myself as well as a lot of people would say Aaron Donald crying on the sidelines, that was a haunting image. But at the same time, we remember that because they went from crying on the sidelines to the next year winning the Super Bowl. But in order to get to the Super Bowl, the Rams needed to make a decision. They needed to move on from a quarterback that they drafted, was an in-house guy, was loved, and just a huge fan favorite of the fan base, Jared Goff. They moved on from him to go out and get a more superior quarterback that fit the offense that Sean McVay envisioned in Matthew Stafford. Now, the Rams find themselves in a weird spot. They were technically, if you're going by the pattern, we're supposed to win the Super Bowl this year. But it's always been 2025 for a lot of different Rams fans. Whether they're talking about the uniforms, which I don't even know exist, and honestly, people keep asking me about it, I have no idea. But if not the uniforms, they've been talking about how 2025 was going to be the year where the Rams really made a move to actually do something. And it's not just going out and getting a really good pass catcher or whatever. Start going back to their roots with the F them picks. But I push back against that. I don't think that's what they're going to do. I actually think they're going to run back the majority of the defense, and I think that they'll pick their spots where, let's be honest here, it makes the most sense. They have a really good-looking roster, but in order to be a top 5 talented roster, I think they have to make a couple moves. I'm not saying that they can't go into next year with another great draft and do it. But those 2 drafts have put them in a position where maybe they can take a risk or two. Anyway, let's dive into it. We're starting with 10, even though none of these go in order. And I guess before that, we'll get into honorable mentions. My honorable mentions for the offense, I got Jordan Meredith, the guard from the Raiders. He's going to be 27 this year. Was really impressed with some of the things that I saw. I went back and I watched his tape, and I'm like, this guy looks familiar. Sure enough, it is the Jordan Meredith from the Rams back, 3 or so years ago when he was a UDFA for the Rams, was cut, didn't make the, he didn't make the regular season roster, essentially. Meredith since has become a pretty solid player. Could be an interesting guard option. He's an honorable mention because I don't suspect the Rams are going to look at guard, but you never know. Another honorable mention, because of the age, 31 years of age, is Ronnie Stanley. Now, Ronnie Stanley could be in play here for a few things. First thing is, if they like Alaric Jackson to move over and take over for Rob Havenstein, and they decide to move on from Rob Havenstein, they could move Alaric to right tackle and sign Ronnie Stanley. I don't think they're going to do that, but that's just an option. Another option is if they lose Alaric Jackson altogether, Ronnie Stanley has veteran, experience, obviously. He's played in big-time games, and he's a really good tackle. Now, he has injury concerns from the past, but he's looked really good as of late. Again, honorable mention. I don't have him in the top 10 because I don't really think he's that realistic for what the Rams are trying to do. And the last but not least honorable mention here, Tommy Tremble. He's going to be 25 this year, the tight end out of Notre Dame in Carolina. I think you've seen some good things from him. It's just been, kind of a lackluster bunch of quarterback play up until, down the stretch with, Bryce Young. But also, I just think that he got overshadowed. I mean, you have guys like, you go out and get Leggett. You go out and you get Adam Thielen. I just think that he was kind of passed over and never really got a chance. So is Tommy Tremble an option? Could be. Well, we'll see. I don't know if the Rams would necessarily do that instead of just going out and drafting somebody. But to me, I see it as Tremble is a guy that you get, if you can get him cheap. Now, this tight end room isn't the best, but it's not the worst. It's just we don't know who's going to be in it. Higbee's 32. Parkinson was kind of disappointing. Davis Allen was disappointing, and Hunter Long will likely be in free agency. I don't think they bring him back unless it's like way later on and they get him for cheap. But with that said, in addition to that, the tight end market is not good. It's just not. It's very limited. So we're going to be talking about one of those guys who made the top 10. But for the most part, I would advise against going after tight ends in this tight end class, because if you go after the top dog and you find a good, need for him or whatever, there is also the concern that because he is the top dog in a really weak tight end market, you're going to be paying top dollar for a guy that is good but not great or elite. And you don't want to be paying great money to a good player. You definitely don't want to be paying elite money to a good player. So that's where you get into that mix. But let's dive into the top 10, starting with 10, even though none of these go in order. But number 10, I will put at the end here. It's Justin Fields. I really like Justin Fields just from a football perspective. I'm just a fan of his game. Young quarterback. He started 50 games so far. He's played in 50 games so far, 44 starts, 45 touchdowns, 31 interceptions, an 83.9 passer rating. You've seen some elite play out of him. You've also seen some lackluster play. I think when you look at Fields, he's gotten better each year. He lost his starting job to Russell Wilson that he claimed after Wilson got hurt. I don't know if he's the best fit for the Rams, because they rely so much on timing and precision. But at the same time, he does give you kind of that new age quarterback dynamic the Rams are currently lacking. Could be like a Justin Fields could be like a Jalen Hurts type for this offense, whether that's something the Rams want to do or not. But it would be post Stafford. Let's not make any mistake about it. If they go out and get Justin Fields, he is expected to be one of the expensive young quarterback options in free agency. So if they did this, that means Justin Fields would likely be agreeing to taking over for Stafford when the time comes. This wouldn't just be a one-year thing, and he'd be an interesting backup that gives them a different dynamic. Now, they've balked at that in the past. They could have brought back Wentz. They went with Garoppolo, who fit their offense more. So are they stubborn? Are they open to it? I don't know. I don't think it's fair to say, but aside from Darnold, he's probably going to be the most paid of all the young quarterbacks, especially from that 2021 class. But I don't necessarily think the Rams will go the route of Justin Fields. I do think that Fields would potentially be willing to sit behind Stafford and play for Sean McVay, but I also think that this guy is going to try everything in his power to find a starting role. Even if it's not there, he'll try to carve out one. And if you're in that mindset, you look at Baker Mayfield, you're not going to settle to be a backup, knowing there is no way to get up there. Does Justin Fields, still young, does he want to take a back seat still? Does he want to just sit? I don't think he does. I mean, this is a guy that's 26 years old, this year. Now that's young, but time flies, right? So I don't know if he wants to waste that. I think he's ideally looking for a spot where maybe he's not the starter right away, but he at least has a chance to earn it. And regardless of how you feel with the Rams, he has no chance to earn it over Matthew Stafford, at least this year. So that's why he's number 10. Number 9 is an intriguing option here. You've probably heard of his name before because at one point he was one of the top tackles in the draft. He was a first-round pick, 10th overall in 2020 out of Alabama. He dominated at right tackle. I'm talking about Jedrick Wills Jr., who started 57 games in his career. I want to point this out because I know some people will be like, Will sucks. Why would you be interested in him? One, I don't like saying players suck. I really don't. But let's just say this, okay? Covering the Jets, I always felt like that 1 year I covered them, I always felt like Becton was better than people gave credit for. And I just felt like there were some injuries. Maybe he was playing out of position at tackle. But I just felt like Becton was just a guy that was just going to make it, And the Jets never really surrounded him with the good coaching staff. He just was never really a position to succeed. I look at Wills as similar to Becton, a former first-round pick, a lot of hype, and just never really amounted to what they expected. So the next place he goes with Philly, they kick him in at guard, and you instantly see a different player, a guy that's actually utilizing his body composition. And you saw that. You saw that in the last game the Rams played. The guy's big, right? They found a way to use him. Well, Wills is also immensely talented. He's got a ton of talent. The problem is for Wills is that he's still young. And let's be honest here, the Browns have given up on him. He's going to be 26 this year. The Browns gave up on him. This is a guy that started only at left tackle, 3,686 snaps at left tackle this past year, or this past career, with the Browns. Now, keep in mind, he's only played in 13 games combined the last 2 years. Knee injuries have been an issue, whether it's an MCL or ACL. He's been heavily scrutinized. I mean, by fans, by the team. He was benched mainly because there was a big controversial thing where he came out and said he was going to take a business decision and sit himself out because he didn't trust his knee. And a lot of people hated on him for that. I feel like it's a little unfair because we don't really know. Only he knows, the amount of pain he was in. And I think after that, it just kind of, went all downhill from there. Certain plays where you could see it on Twitter, people reposting, Browns fans reposting and getting on him for the lack of effort. I think they're a little cherry picked as well. But when you already have that kind of, reputation on a team and whatever, the fans aren't going to let you live it down. So unfortunately, I think he needs a change of scenery. Fortunately, I think he needs a change of scenery. The Rams should be in position where, I think he'd help big time because he could be the note boom on this team. But also you look at Rob Havenstein, and he's the last remaining St. Louis Ram on the team. Is this his last year? He's only under contract one more year. There's a chance they could get rid of him, as a cap casualty before the season starts. Not saying I recommend that, but that's certainly a possibility. Maybe they move on from him. But to me, I just think the position they're in right now, I think Wills would be a perfect reclamation project. Wouldn't be the first time the Rams got somebody from the Browns, of course, Austin Corbett, but he was drafted in the first round, Wills was. And I just feel like there have been moments in the past where you could see he might just be a better right tackle. I mean, he only played at right tackle at Alabama, was dominant. You see the athleticism at left tackle for sure, but sometimes guys just can't make that switch. And he puts on some good tape here and there. He has some dominant reps. You see the kick slide. You see the athleticism on full display and the overall range. But then you also see, he struggles. And I just think that snap in, snap out consistency probably make more sense to try him at right tackle. So I'm not saying he'd 100% work out, but that is where I would try him. And I think with the Rams, they could get this guy for cheap on a prove-it deal, maybe a 2-year deal, whatever. You get him sitting behind Havenstein, and then you bring him back to start and be the right tackle of the future, a guy with first-round pedigree, a guy who was dominant in the SEC, and a guy that the Rams probably have a lot of work done on because this is a guy that was one of the top tackles in that draft. So let's just be honest here. I really do believe that the Rams could actually get something out of him. I think that he needs a change of scenery, and I think he's immensely talented, but he's had some things come up, and the injuries have been a problem. Now, again, the injuries were a problem with Becton. He needed a change of scenery. The coaching was better with the Browns, I'll give you that, but Becton moved on to the Eagles, a better organization, immediately had an impact when he moved positions. I'm not saying Wills is a guard. I'm saying he's definitely a tackle, but he might be playing the wrong tackle spot. And just so happens that if the Rams bring back Alec Jackson, they're going to have that right tackle spot for a long time available, going into this offseason. And who better than to grab Jedrick Wills, try to develop him behind Havenstein, and then if it works out, you save yourself a draft pick, you save yourself some money, you get him cheap, and you just build him up. I think this is the perk of being the Rams. They've done this before. They're attempting to do this with Emmanuel Forbes. We'll see if they can do this with Wills. So I love Wills as a fit. He's down here because he hasn't really accomplished a ton and he has struggled, but just the potential there in a market that doesn't have the most going for it. I think this is a no-brainer as young as he is. Moving on to 8 here, we got Juwan Johnson, the tight end from the Saints. Interestingly enough, he's by far the tight end one of this class. Now, number 2 would probably be Tyler Conklin, but he's 29. I don't know if necessarily he lacks the explosion that you have with Juwan Johnson. I don't know if the Rams would be interested in that. Johnson's a guy that I think could be an option for the Rams depending on how much it costs, because I do think that's a big deal. If he costs a lot, the Rams aren't going to be interested. But if they get him at a decent value here to go with a Tyler Higbee, to go with Davis Allen and maybe Colby Parkinson, depending. Johnson is a former wide receiver who just simply wasn't fast enough to play receiver in the NFL. So he was converted over to tight end. Now, I don't think he was that slow, but that's a big reason why he moved over to wide receiver, moving over to tight end, because he wasn't able to separate, wasn't, all that. So regardless, Johnson is started in 34 games. He's played 67. He's had 146 receptions, 1,622 yards, 18 touchdowns, a 65.8 catch percentage, and a 52.8 contested catch percentage, making him a better than 50-50 ball. Now, this guy's been pretty healthy. Worst injury he's ever suffered was a calf strain. It cost him 4 games in 2023, but for the most part, stayed healthy. Doesn't have a ton of usage because of the limited role he had in the first 2 seasons. He's an average to below average blocker, keep in mind. That is a downside to him, but 103.5 passer rating when targeted. And this past year, quarterbacks when throwing to him had 111.5 targeted passer rating. So this guy just makes plays. He makes quarterbacks better. He'll likely get paid the most because he's the best on the market. And in a lackluster market, the only thing you're really hoping for is that this draft class, being that it's as top heavy as it is at tight end, you're hoping that that could lower his cost, because otherwise you're going to have to be spending a decent amount on him. I see him as a Jordan Reed-esque player for McVay. We know he wanted one in Gerald Everett. I think he could be that type of player, moving forward. So am I saying to go out and get Juwan Johnson? No, I'm not saying to go out and get Juwan Johnson, but I am saying that he does make some sense depending on if they're willing to spend on him. 29 years old this year, but he's explosive, limited usage, could be a huge red zone threat there. And to me, I don't think you go out and you get Juwan Johnson to be your number 1. You go out and you get him to have a role. Like, is he worth spending that much money? Maybe not, but you're already spending that much money on Parkinson. So it's not like you've never spent that money before. That is something to keep in mind. But I will say this about Juwan Johnson. I think he'd work well with Tyler Higbee. He is not, excuse me, he is not an every down player. He's just not. He doesn't block well. You saw him try to block Jared Verse. To be fair, don't put him on Jared Verse. But he's just not a blocker, right? He is a inline tight end, receiving guy. He can flex out wide, can work in the slot. He gives you those reads and what have you. If the Rams don't want to spend a top pick on a tight end, this might be a short-term Band-Aid. He might want a long-term deal, but he's 29. So I think this would be like a 2-year deal, maybe even a 1-year deal. Like I said, good player. He's never had an explosive, dominant season, but you've always seen those potential, moments. And he was key and critical in the red zone. So keep an eye on Juwan Johnson. I'm not saying the Rams will get him, but it is an intriguing guy for, keep in mind, Sean McVay, who was the tight ends coach at one point. All right, so next up here, we have number 7, and that is J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins, you might have forgotten about up until this year. He's going to be 27 years old this year. This is somebody that I find really intriguing. The reason being is the value. He just had over 900 yards rushing. So you'd think he's going to get paid. Well, I don't think he's going to. And here's why. MCL sprain, Achilles tear, ACL tear, LCL tear, hamstring tear, high ankle sprain, and leg break in 2016. Those are the things that's on his resume. That's his injury history. That is brutal. That said, he's still young at 27 years old. He's coming off a 900-plus yard season. He hasn't fumbled since his rookie year, and he's still explosive. I went back and I made sure. I watched the tape before the injuries, after the injuries. He still has the explosion, okay? He still has that home run hitting ability. That hasn't gone away. Don't believe me? Well, listen to this. He's 7th in the NFL in breakaway percentage for 2024, and he was 7th in 2022. This is a guy that has just continued to stay who he is, despite all the injuries. You got to give J.K. Dobbins a lot of credit for that. But why would the Rams be interested? They got Kyren Williams, and we'll get to that in another video about his future with the Rams. But Dobbins is playing 37 games. He has 21 starts. In those starts, he has a 5.2 yards per carry average. He has 2,252 yards and 21 touchdowns. Again, breakaway percentage is 7th among all running backs in the NFL. And that's up there alongside with guys like Jahmyr Gibbs. So breakaway percentage gives you an idea of how explosive this guy is. But my biggest thing is that he's not the best pass protector, and he is not the best, down in, down out, consistent snap to snap guy like Kyren Williams. He's the guy that hits some home runs and makes the stats look a little bit better than maybe they would be. So with that said, he fits perfectly into that, spell back role for Kyren Williams. You have Kyren Williams who's going to hit the 4 or 5 yard carries. You have Kyren Williams who's going to help in pass pro. You have Kyren Williams who is going to be the guy that you rely on in short yardage situations. However, with J.K. Dobbins, if you're looking for a home run threat here, you feel like, just the way the defense is getting blocked out, your offensive line looks really good, the momentum is building, you got to give Kyren at least a break here, and then you just feel it coming, and J.K. Dobbins can hit that home run for you with the bases loaded, and that, to me, is where his value comes in, because people are going to look at, how is that going to happen? He had 900-plus yards this year. Yes, but those injuries, the concern there is never going to allow a team to buy into him solely as a number one running back. And so with that said, I think the Rams really need to consider this. I understand how it looks. You got Blake Corum, who's coming off an injury. It's decent injury. It's a concern. But also, Blake Corum is a lot of what Kyren Williams does. And to diversify your running back room, J.K. Dobbins could, really add that explosion. I think he's a better version of Cam Akers, okay, in a lot of respects. I mean, he's got the explosive abilities. He's got way better vision. The yards after carry, yards per carry show that, 5.2. But I think he's a little bit stronger. Like, he's got more power. So I like the leg drive. I like J.K. Dobbins. I'm not saying they'll do this, but this is a guy that I'm looking at as an option. If you're really trying to find another guy that could spell Kyren, I think J.K. Dobbins would make a lot of sense. And for that reason, he is number 7 on this list. Number 6 is Trey Lance, 25 years old this season. Won't get too much into Lance because I've already talked about him a lot on this channel. But he had the ankle fracture / dislocation in 2022. Only started 4 games with the 49ers, almost as many games started as number of first-round draft picks traded away. As crazy as that is, the 49ers really botched that. And then he only started 1 game for the Cowboys. He's still the youngest quarterback on the market. He has experience in the Shanahan offense, which is kind of similar to Sean McVay. I just trust Sean McVay. I think he's a better developer of talent than Kyle Shanahan and definitely better than Brian Schottenheimer, who was the offensive coordinator this year. I just trust him more. And so with that said, you got the dual threat ability. You got a lot of talent, just natural talent. 80.3 passer rating in 5 starts is not the best, not the worst. 5 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, including a rushing touchdown. I think Trey Lance is the type of guy that you go out, you get really cheap, and maybe you convince him to take a 2-year deal and say, look, we're going to try and build you up, and then we'll see. Stafford's getting up there. Maybe you take over if you do enough and you get, within the system and understanding. It's going to take some development here. Keep in mind, guy hadn't thrown an interception in college. He had that one tryout game that they scheduled for North Dakota State because of COVID. And during that game, of course, he threw his first interception of his college career. He only really started 1 season. So he's behind the 8 ball in that sense. Then he goes to the 49ers, and they just never really give him a chance. They even kill his confidence in a lot of respects. And then he goes to the Cowboys, and they're starting Cooper Rush over him. So really, this guy just hasn't been in a good spot. I think the Rams would be a good spot. Would he make that decision? I don't know, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And to be around Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford, I think would do wonders for him. So I always felt like he had it. He was one of my favorite prospects I've ever scouted. I am not out on Trey Lance. I just feel like he needs to sign with the right organization. He has to have the right people in his camp. And you know what? I think the Rams give him that. So if he goes there, I'll feel really good about it. He comes in here at 6. Now we're in the top 5 here. This is where it gets interesting. Number 5 is 29 years old this year, Chris Godwin, who has played 111 games, 84 starts, 579 receptions, 7,266 yards, 39 touchdowns, 71% catch rate, a 59.9% contested catch rate. His issue are the injuries. Otherwise, I think he'd probably get more money than T. Higgins. I think the injuries regarding the ankle dislocation, the thigh, the ACL tear, the MCL sprain, hamstring issues, concussion, those are the things that's going to hold back Chris Godwin. With that said, he's averaged over 14 yards per reception the last 3 seasons alone. He's a great blocking wide receiver. Loved him coming out of college at Penn State. Wanted him over Cooper Kupp. We saw how that worked out. Obviously, Cooper Kupp ended up working out a little bit better. But he's interchangeable because he can play in the slot. He can play on the outside. He can play every wide receiver position. He had 109.7 target passer rating for his career, but was over 127 this year. So when you look at just how important Chris Godwin has been to his teams, I know he had Tom Brady throwing him the ball, but you see that production never really dipped, even going over to Baker Mayfield. So look, Chris Godwin, he is getting up there in age, and he might be aging quicker because of the injuries, and that ankle dislocation is concerning. With that said, though, if they could get a deal on him at 29 years old, maybe you take a year flyer or 2-year deal on him, he might be worth it because he's got some crazy contested catch numbers. He fits the offense because he has familiarity with, what Liam Cohen, who's now the head coach of the Jaguars, what he's doing. He had a lot of the same concepts that the Rams run. So I think Godwin would be a natural fit. It would be bizarre if they ended up replacing Cooper Kupp with the guy I wanted over Cooper Kupp in the draft. But I just feel like those injuries are definitely worth being concerned about. And the bottom line is, if he stays healthy the rest of his career, which isn't a guarantee, but if he did, I feel like he'd be huge for the Rams. I just think that the success rate when he's on the field is immense. Can be the number 1, can be the number 2. Obviously, I think he fits really well with Puka Nacua because he's used to playing second fiddle to Mike Evans, but he can also step up in games where you need your best and your best guy is being shut down. He could step up in those games. So yards after the catch guy, I think Chris Godwin makes a lot of sense. If he checks out medically, that is going to be a medical thing. A lot of these guys have a lot of medical issues going on. He did not finish the season because of the injury, and they missed him in the playoffs. We'll see what ends up happening. Godwin could very well follow Liam Cohen to Jacksonville. He could stay in Tampa. The injury does complicate things, but look out. Chris Godwin is a very good option if those medicals check out. Moving on to number 4 here, we got Josh Palmer, who I am going to be talking about a lot on this channel. I think he is the hidden gem of this free agency class. Very similar to last year, what I was saying, this underrated player, Juwan Jennings, not utilized nearly enough in San Francisco, and sure enough, they brought him back, and he had a 1,000-yard season. So that's how I feel about Palmer. Palmer is going to be 26 this season. This is somebody that was drafted around after Tutu Atwell. 58 games, 29 starts, 2,287 receiving yards, 182 receptions, a 64.5 catch percentage, and 10 touchdowns. Here's the kicker, though. He was 10th in separation score this year, according to all NFL wide receivers, and 5th in win rate this year. He's a deep threat. He's averaged 15-plus yards per reception back-to-back years. A good blocking wide receiver. Interchangeable, can work all over the field. He has a 47.9 contested catch rate, which is not bad, and 98.1 targeted passer rating for his career. And really, when you want to find a comparison to what he does and what he brings to the table, because I think he'd fit the Rams offense like a glove, but people are going to be like, if they only brought in Josh Palmer, right, with everybody they have, people would complain. They want the big name, and I understand that. With that said, though, if they brought in Josh Palmer, make no mistake about it, that would be an amazing fit. And the thing about Palmer, I get the vibe that I got because I wanted him. You can go back and you could find articles on it. I wanted Robert Woods before the Rams signed him. I watched him with the Buffalo Bills. I felt like he was an outstanding blocker and was forced to be because they were the number one, run-heavy offense in the league. Well, this Chargers team runs the ball a lot despite having Justin Herbert. And so Josh Palmer doesn't have a choice. He has to know how to block. He's always been a good blocker. And I'm getting the same vibes I got, not just Juwan Jennings, I'm getting the same vibes I got from Robert Woods. Young, kind of underrated, overshadowed by Sammy Watkins. Palmer was overshadowed by McConkey. Funny enough, Watkins ended up going to the Rams a year later. Or no, it was actually in that season. So that is really funny when you think about it. Maybe McConkey comes over to the Rams with him. Just kidding, of course. But all jokes aside, Palmer is that kind of diamond in the rough here. And in a free agency class that's really just not emanating, elite. It's not great. It's very similar to the MLB free agency class. I mean, you got Juan Soto, you got some other guys that you like, but for the most part, I think a lot of teams are going to not in the MLB, but a lot of teams in the NFL will look to the draft. They'll look at trading. That's how I feel with this draft class. I mean, you got your Juan Soto guy potentially and T. Higgins, and you got some other guys that are really good, but for the most part, it's kind of a down free agency class. So you got to find these diamonds in the rough. You got to find value. Josh Palmer, to me, emanates that, and he has a lot of value, and I think he'd be a great fit for the Rams. So I have him at 4. Not that any of these numbers make any sense anyway. Number 3 is Ty Johnson. Now, this is an interesting one here. J.K. Dobbins is more explosive, probably the bigger name, but Ty Johnson is really carving out a role with the Buffalo Bills, who are on their way to potentially a Super Bowl. Ty Johnson, 89 games, 7 starts only, 4.6 yards per carry, 9.1 yards per reception, 12 total touchdowns in his 6 seasons. He's an explosive back who can pass pro, a good runner, and a great receiving back. He has familiarity with Michael Floyd going back to the New York Jets, and he's got familiarity with Matthew Stafford from his rookie year going back to the Detroit Lions. He'd be a nice change of pace for Kyren Williams, and he's playing an important role for the Bills in the playoffs. Now, they might keep him, but here's the kicker, though. The Rams tried to get him twice. They tried to sign him, and then they tried to add him onto the 53-man roster, or they tried to add him onto their practice squad, and the Bills, got him to go onto their 53-man roster. So this guy has had interest from the Rams in the past. There are 2 guys in the building that have familiarity with him. I think it's a no-brainer if you need to add another guy, but you don't want him to be too high profile where Blake Corum feels like he's done in LA, and you feel like you kind of have to move on from him, whereas J.K. Dobbins, bigger name, feels like that's kind of the end of Blake Corum and all that. So Ty Johnson kind of gives you that option, but he's always been underrated. He's explosive. You need a home run. I think he can hit that. And then, of course, the pass-catching element, which I feel like has been lacking with the Rams. It made such a big deal with Todd Gurley, made such a big deal with Marshall Faulk and Steven Jackson, and for whatever reason, just hasn't been a huge staple in Kyren Williams' game. It's not to say he can't do it. They just don't let him. So I'm hoping at some point, especially with Michael Floor, I was hoping with his usage of that running back passing game, when you go back and look at what he did with the Jets, I was hoping that would have more emphasis in this offense. It hasn't. So, we'll see if that ever comes to light. But Ty Johnson, if they do go that route, is a great natural hands receiver and would be a great receiving option for the Rams at running back. Could be a scat back, if you will, but would really just be a change of pace guy for Kyren. So I like the move. Again, these numbers don't make any sense because I wouldn't take Ty Johnson over, say, Chris Godwin, but, be that as it may, there you go. These 2, though, I feel really good about these 2. And I think both of them will be Rams if the Rams are willing to shell out money for a big-time receiver and shell out money, or not shell out, but go out and get a disgruntled young quarterback that has starting experience, that got better each year, and essentially could be the heir to the throne. I'm talking about Zach Wilson and T. Higgins. Well, we'll start with Zach Wilson here. 34 games, 33 starts, 23 touchdowns, 25 interceptions in 3 seasons. He sat all of 2024. The injuries he's had, concussions, a knee meniscus tear, PCL sprain, and in college he had a thumb fracture and a shoulder labrum tear in high school. So that's what you're dealing with. Zach Wilson injury-wise is still a very young player. Zach Wilson will be 26 this year. And so when you look at Zach Wilson, dual threat quarterback, kind of fits the new age model of quarterback. He got better each year, didn't really have a lot around him. I know they got Garrett Wilson, but that was about it. Like, he didn't have a ton around him. Same offensive coordinator, obviously from the Jets, now with the Rams. He signed off on a reunion, according to Albert Breer, in early 2024. Rams just didn't trade for him, right? But now he's a free agent, and I think the Rams are going to sign him. I really believe that. I've been wrong before, so it won't be the first time, but I really just have this feeling that they are going to sign him. He's an option to not only back up Stafford, but he's an option to also develop into the heir to Matthew Stafford, because he's a former second overall pick in 2021. And look, the Jets just have this, as sad as it is for me to say, because I have a soft spot for them, but they just have a bad track record with quarterbacks. I mean, even Aaron Rodgers, they couldn't go out and go all in correctly, right? But regardless of that, Sam Darnold, then he goes and finds his way with Carolina a little bit, looks like, and then, of course, he ends up doing what he does with the Vikings. In addition to that, Geno Smith, right? These type of quarterbacks that go from first-round picks to bust that end up starting somewhere else, it doesn't always happen. E.J. Manuel didn't work out with the Bills, and it just didn't work out. But Geno Smith and Sam Darnold both came from that organization. Was it the media? Was it the organization? I think it was a little bit of both. And so I think if you get Zach Wilson to the Rams, and he's sitting behind Matthew Stafford, he's going to pick up a lot of what he's doing. It had to hurt last year for Wilson to sit behind a rookie in Bo Nix, but you could really learn a lot from Stafford, especially with the way Zach Wilson wants to play football, okay? He's a very, very athletic quarterback, but he makes some killer throws as well. He's had some games where you're like, okay, this is why the kid was drafted second overall. Let's not forget. So I do really like the idea of bringing Zach Wilson to the Rams, and I honestly think that's what they're going to do. A former BYU quarterback thrown into a BYU like absolute megastar wide receiver in Puka Nacua would be fun to watch. But all jokes aside, I really do think keep an eye on Zach Wilson. I think he could be a Ram sooner than later. And lastly, T. Higgins. I mean, are you really shocked? Did you really need me to tell you T. Higgins? I already said T. Higgins, but did you? This is really the number one guy. I think Higgins, 70 games, 330 receptions, 4,595 yards, 34 touchdowns in 5 seasons. He even played 7 postseason games. The injuries are a concern. He's got some quad, thigh, rib, concussion, and shoulder injuries that are a cause for concern, especially the way he plays. But he's never had any sort of ACL. He hasn't had any of that crazy ligament damage, and that's a good thing. He's incredibly productive. He's had 4 900-plus yard seasons. His catch percentage is almost 65%. Quarterbacks have a targeted passer rating of 114.2 when throwing his way for his entire career. That's insane. It just goes to show you that this guy, good things happen when you throw to T. Higgins. He's also a great blocker, and he's coming from a Zach Taylor offense that is very derivative from what Sean McVay does. So he already has those concepts in mind or similar things. He's got a 44% catch percentage, which isn't amazing by any stretch, but it's not bad at all. It's a pretty good number. Getting it close to 50 is the best, but having it over 50 is just crazy. It's why Chris Godwin having a catch percentage of almost 60 is insane as well. But T. Higgins can play all 3 wide receiver positions. You know, he could play in the slot. He can be your X. He can go up and high point the football. He can be that big slot that's like a big target that you throw to on third down. I just think if you are talking about this team and saying they really just missed this and they could have won the Super Bowl, if you gave them T. Higgins, they win the Super Bowl. The big thing that it came down to against the Eagles is that they did not have another dynamic pass catcher. I really believe that. I think they were missing one more weapon because that was the issue with the offense this year. They'd have moments where they'd show up and you'd be like, where'd this come from? Why don't we have this all year? Well, Cooper Kupp kind of fell off, and I don't really mean to be a jerk about it, but he did. He's not the same receiver. Demarcus Robinson's best games are when Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are having, good games. He could play off them. They didn't use Tutu Atwell enough. They didn't use Jordan Whittington enough. And so they only had Tyler Higbee, who was leaps and bounds their best tight end. They only had him down the stretch, like the last 4 or 5 games. So if they had T. Higgins, if they had a receiver like that, there you go. When they lost in the cold in a divisional round game, they turned around and made a trade for Matthew Stafford. They were a quarterback away. And now they just lost in the cold in a divisional round. And to me, I feel like they are a wide receiver away. If Cooper Kupp didn't suffer those injuries, I believe he'd be totally fine. And I think the Rams would probably be going to the Super Bowl. I do. But unfortunately, Cooper Kupp did suffer those injuries. He has lost a step. And unfortunately, because of that, it put the Rams in a very predictable role on the offense. And I think it allowed defenses to really hone in. So when people are constantly saying, why does Matthew Stafford only target one guy? He doesn't, but it makes it look that way. Because when you have not a lot of time, because the pass protection wasn't great this year, keep in mind. But in addition to that, you don't have a lot of time, but you also don't have the crazy mobility that some of the other quarterbacks around the league have. And in addition to that, no one's really creating separation. Well, now you're going to have to kind of lean on Puka Nacua, who is your star, who can make plays after the catch, because you're not getting explosives. So now I have to rely on the guy that's most likely to cause an explosive and create an explosive based on just a screen pass or a quick slant. And that is Puka Nacua. But what if you had a guy that could create an explosive, whether that's 80 yards over the top or, even a quick slant to T. Higgins? He's a big body. He's hard to bring down. I just think when push comes to shove, this might not happen. Patriots have a ton of cap space, I believe over $120 million. So they are the favorite to get T. Higgins. I mean, everybody would agree on that. But if there is a way for the Rams to get T. Higgins, add him to this wide receiver room, watch out. To me, that's a missing piece. They need one more elite playmaker. And that's the thing. They had that when they won the Super Bowl, and then they lost it over the course of time. I think the Rams were capable, as I've said over and over again, of winning the Super Bowl, getting over that hump the last 2 years. But I think if they went out and got T. Higgins, and of course, health is a big thing, but you could live with him missing 4 games in a season and being ready for the postseason. His entire purpose for this team would be in the postseason. They could get by without him if he missed 4 games. They can't get by without him if he misses 10. So I think the big thing here is you got to go out, you got to get a guy that's going to be difference maker. And if that offense starts to kick, like we believe at some point it will, the defense is just only getting better. And that's the thing. That's what makes the Rams scary. So they really were a T. Higgins away from winning the Super Bowl, but you could say the same thing. They were Saquon Barkley away, and they were, potentially a Josh Palmer away. I mean, I think Palmer would have been huge in this offense. Chris Godwin healthy. J.K. Dobbins as a change of pace guy. Maybe a Juwan Johnson helps him score more in the red zone. So you could see where I'm going with this. They definitely weren't a Justin Fields or a Zach Wilson. They weren't a Ty Johnson. They weren't a Trey Lance. Jedrick Wills, they weren't any of those players away. But when you talk about dynamic players that can create explosives like a J.K. Dobbins, like a Joshua Palmer, like Chris Godwin, like T. Higgins, yeah, you could say they were one of those players away. So that's all I got. If you stuck around, I appreciate you. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Check out today's sponsor and Prize Picks, of course. Check out today's sponsor and get that Jaden Daniels freebie, 0.5 passing yards. But I'll wrap it up by saying this. Final top 10, T. Higgins, Zach Wilson, Ty Johnson, Joshua Palmer, Chris Godwin, Trey Lance, J.K. Dobbins, Juwan Johnson, Jedrick Wills, and Justin Fields. I hope you guys enjoyed. A defensive one will be coming. It's just understand this. Expect more of the spending to be on offense. Defense, I don't think they have to add a lot, but it's going to be outside the house defensive options, and that's what we're going to do. So the next video like this will be defensive, and then we'll do film, like breakdown to an extent, but like just film watching of T. Higgins and Ty Johnson, the way these guys could actually impact the Rams next year. So that's going to do it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys soon. Later, folks. All right, guys, just a quick update here. The lounge, which I've told you guys about after every single video, we are now at 6 videos. We have almost 700 subscribers. So if you haven't gotten in and checked out my new side project, definitely be sure to do that. Interviewing voice actors and athletes and entrepreneurs, musicians, all the good stuff there. Be sure to check it out. The link is in the description below. In case you guys haven't noticed, I do have a Discord channel for my community on this channel. And if you want to be a part of it, it is free. The link is in the description below. You can sign up. This is basically a 24/7 Rams channel, and we are almost at 1,100 members. So if you want to be a part of it, just hit the link in the description below.